Dave Smith, who's a famous comic on Twitter, famously said recently that if you're not a libertarian in a pandemic and you're not fighting against these kinds of lockdowns, then what good are you? And to me, I think that that is the final straw, that this year has really shown where the rubber hits the road when our principles come into contact with the real world. Can they survive? This has been a struggle, not for a political party, but I think the struggle between what Matt Drudge called several years ago, the fight between authoritarianism versus libertarianism. You're either for the lockdowns of our economy, for mask mandates, or you're against mask mandates. Now, many people have drawn distinctions and been able to do so, I think, very well, shades of gray, to say things like, oh, perhaps we should wear a mask, it might help, but I don't have any evidence for that. It's just a hunch based on the best available evidence that I have. However, I don't believe in a mandate. Or you've just said things like, listen to the scientists. I'm going to listen to the scientists, but I'm only going to listen to the scientists that agree with me. And if they disagree with me, then they're a bunch of right-wing Republicans or conspiracy theorists or QAnon, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And where are the libertarians on all of this one? I was thinking to myself, because obviously I ran against Donald Trump in 2016, that I would probably support the Libertarian Party candidate. And that has proven to not be the case. And why? It's because after so many years interacting with libertarians and gauging their responses to the things that Donald Trump did that were libertarian, I realized that the pool of people who self-identified as libertarians who would give Donald Trump any credit whatsoever, I'm talking about even a smidgen of credit whatsoever for doing something libertarian, that could probably fit in a Waffle House, that amount of libertarians who were honestly able to say and objectively analyze what Donald Trump did that was libertarian and to give him credit for it. There, I would say 90 to 95% of the liberty movement is united in opposition to Donald Trump for the very non-libertarian things that he has done. So I had to ask myself, am I really being logical here if I just play into this mindset? Is Donald Trump the most libertarian president since Ronald Reagan? Well, I think the answer is yes. And when you post something like that, many libertarians will agree with you and they'll say, yes, but that's a very, very low bar. Well, okay, it may be a low bar, but at the moment, our bar is literally on the ground. We're at 0 here for wins for liberty, for at least that are branded libertarian wins. So is it possible for us to say, hey, maybe we'd be happy with taking one single step forward towards a libertarian cause? But I would say that a lot of libertarians will not admit that, because I think that Trump derangement syndrome is very real. It is an infectious disease, more dangerous than COVID, but it's probably less likely to kill your grandma. Okay, so let's keep things in perspective tonight. And if you notice tonight that I'm focusing on things that are all positive, that's deliberate, but it's not to say that I don't believe that there are negative things that Trump has done for liberty. However, I will say that Trump has been a net positive for liberty, and that it's quite possible that 100 years from now, we may look at Donald Trump in a similar vein to how we look at Grover Cleveland now, in the sense that Grover Cleveland was very unpopular while he was president of the United States. Donald Trump seems to be, and maybe this is just the mainstream media that we're watching on a daily basis, maybe this is just the leftists that we see online on social media, and you don't see opposing opinions because they have jobs and don't have time to tweet all day, and perhaps that's why we think that Donald Trump is so hated. But the ultimate test for that is going to be at the polls tomorrow on the election, and then we'll be able to truly determine how the American people really feel about him. Now, so like I said, for the purpose of the speech, I'm going to focus entirely on policies, not personalities, because a lot of people will say, well, consider his personality, consider his temperament, consider all that. I ultimately do not care about that. People will try and say, well, he slept with a porn star. Well, I'm a libertarian, not a social conservative. So I'm not insanely concerned about Trump's personal habits in that sense. I will say that in terms of drugs and alcohol, in terms of that behavior, that Donald Trump doesn't engage in that. And to be fair, Joe Biden doesn't do that as well. My libertarian friends, just consider, who are you giving nuclear weapons to? You might think that it'd be a good idea for them to be sober. But a lot of people ask me, what is it that, what was the moment that made me reconsider supporting Donald Trump? What was the sort of straw that broke the camel's back? And for me, it was, like Jefferson may have said, a long train of abuses and usurpations, perhaps. But the one thing that really started to make me open my eyes and to consider a support for Donald Trump was the, I believe, third, but possibly fourth violent attack on one of the most libertarian senators that we have, Senator Rand Paul. Now, of course, you'll remember Senator Rand Paul was initially attacked by deranged Bernie bro. He was shot at along with Steve Scalise at a congressional baseball practice game. As a matter of fact, that field was across from my apartment for some time. I remember it quite well. And then subsequently, Rand Paul has been attacked 3, I believe, possibly even 4 times. And that third or fourth time was the time that Rand Paul was walking down the street in Washington, D.C. after the Republican convention. And it was not just that he was violently attacked. It was what the leftists were saying while they were attacking him. That is what started to turn the light bulb on over my head as to the threat that we are facing. The people who attacked Senator Rand Paul did so shouting at him, "Say her name, say her name, say her name." And whose name did they want her to say? Well, it was the name of the woman that Senator Rand Paul had written on legislation called the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act. If you don't know the story of Breonna Taylor, you can look it up later. Essentially, it was a woman who was killed in a no-knock raid, and it contributed, I think, in a way, rightfully so, to the anger that led to the riots and the protests that fulminated across the country as a result of the video that was released of Derek Chauvin with his knee on the neck of the African-American gentleman, George Floyd, which sparked these protests. But what was interesting to me was that the one Republican senator who stood up against that, who tried to fight for criminal justice reform, who has done more for criminal justice reform in this country, save perhaps Kim Kardashian, certainly done more than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar, that the one Republican senator who actually fought for criminal justice reform is the one that is getting violently attacked by those who are saying, "Say her name." And that, to me, I think was a really important moment because, truthfully, any true good libertarian who can look at policy versus politics will say that Donald Trump has been more libertarian than Joe Biden when it comes to the issues of criminal justice reform. Now, I'm going to focus simply on the facts tonight, just the policies. And all of these policies I have compiled for you tonight and can be verified. I can give you all of the data information after this talk if you'd like. And of course, I'm going to do a talk back tonight so you all can answer questions just like I would if I was there in person, which I could be there with you. It's a lot more fun, of course, and we can hang out afterwards. But for the purpose of this talk, I will speak for about 30 minutes for my talk. And then I'll give you about as much time as I can, or at least until my voice runs out, so that you can answer questions and we can have a dialogue. Because my ultimate goal is to grow the liberty movement, not necessarily one party or another, but to find wins for our ideas. And Donald Trump, more than any president since Reagan, and probably more than Reagan, and possibly all the way back since Calvin Coolidge, has done more for liberty than any other American president. And I can back it up. Under Donald Trump, let's start with the economy. Before COVID-19, this economy boomed like no other time in American history since the 1950s. Now, I know a lot of you are college students, but some of you who may be watching this later who might have had a 401k know exactly what I'm talking about. The unemployment for Black Americans in the United States, lower than it had ever been under any president of either party. Under Mr. Trump, our trade relationships have actually vastly improved, and our trade deals have been rewritten. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, what about the tariffs? Of course. Well, I don't agree with the tariffs because a tariff is a tax hike. And China, of course, doesn't pay the tariff. We pay the tariff. So I don't approve of the tariff. However, there is a key factor to many of these trade negotiations that I think a lot of my fellow libertarians have had a blind spot on. And that is one key factor, which is that Donald Trump demanded that our allies pay more for their own self-defense. Donald Trump actually stepped up and demanded that other NATO countries like Germany and others pay for their own national defense more. Not to say that we're not pulling out of international agreements, we're not squashing deals left and right. We're using diplomacy and pressure to ensure that the United States does get better deals when it comes to trade. And quite frankly, there are many times when all we had to do to get more favorable trade deals was just simply to ask. Many European officials stated plainly that, yeah, we always, no one ever negotiated with us before or even asked to get a better deal with us. And the fact that Donald Trump just asked, it seemed it went above the head of so many other public officials before us. Oh, no, we'll just accept whatever terms we can get. We won't even try to negotiate. Has Mr. Trump done enough for struggling American citizens? Probably not, but at least he's recognized them. Maybe he's not articulate, but he has recognized the pain that many Americans felt, and that is what contributed to his election in 2016. He also kept his promise to appoint originalists to the Supreme Court of the United States. In fact, his most recent appointment, Amy Coney Barrett, is the best of all when it comes to originalism, if you are an originalist, as she is a jurist whose mind and character and scholarship are first class. And I believe that she will stand against both judicial and executive excesses. Quite frankly, if you hadn't listened to her speech, highly recommend that you go back after she was inaugurated or sworn in, excuse me. After she was sworn in, because she gave a speech that talked about how a judge's personal preferences are not to affect their policy preferences are not to affect their jurisprudence. They are supposed to make decisions based on what the Constitution allows. And that is, to me, the proper role of a jurist on the Supreme Court. Now, obviously, Neil Gorsuch is someone who libertarians, I think, almost universally admire, universally look towards as someone who agrees with us on a majority of cases. The only real shame about Neil Gorsuch is just that there was only one person who had small l libertarian principles who was qualified enough to serve on the Supreme Court. Only one person in the whole United States with the judicial experience in the high courts. Now, mind you, there are plenty of libertarians on the lower courts, a few dozen here or there. But those lower, it's very rare that those lower court judges tend to make it to the higher courts. And if they make it to the higher courts, of course, even rarer to make it to the Supreme Court. The Neil Gorsuch appointment alone ought to be enough for Liberty to say, hey, this is a good enough step forward for us, because we will have libertarian conclusions and arguments from the bench for maybe decades, possibly decades now, due to the appointment of Justice Neil Gorsuch. Now, has Donald Trump handled the pandemic perfectly? No, but no one masters a pandemic. And the president was right when he came out after COVID to say, we must not cower before this disease. We have got to keep America open and working. And I applaud the President of the United States for showing us what it means to be a fighter. If America truly is the greatest and best nation in the whole world, then a president who gets a deadly disease, fights it in a few days, and then fights to go back to work and show us how healthy and strong he is, I think that sends a powerful political message, especially when China is benefiting from this pandemic, both militarily and economically. And who is the one presidential candidate in the last 4 to 8 years, like even myself, I was not, when I ran for president, was not a China hawk. Donald Trump was a China hawk from the beginning, and he proved that he was right. The pandemic proved that he was right. But getting into the nitty gritty, let's focus now just a little bit more on the economy. Now, the poverty rate in the United States fell to a 17-year low, 11.8% under the Trump administration. And the reason why, jobs. The United States had a jobs-rich environment. 8,764 communities across the country were designated as what we call opportunity zones. Opportunity zones are expected to spur about $100 billion in long-term capital investment, and this is going to happen in economically distressed communities across the country. Guess whose idea the opportunity zones were? Rand Paul. Companies around the world, large international corporations, have brought back to the United States, and this was part of my campaign platform, by the way. Companies brought back over $1 trillion. Donald Trump said it would be $4 trillion, but it's been about $1 trillion, but more is still coming. Companies have brought back over $1 trillion to the United States because of the tax cut bill that Donald Trump advocated for and signed. Manufacturing jobs have grown at the fastest rate in more than 30 years in the United States. The stock market, up until the pandemic, had been reaching record highs. Now, another important factor, probably the most bland, boring, statistical sort of sounding thing I could say, but which one that really ought to make you think, median household income hit the highest levels ever recorded. So median household income, okay? So the middle class in the United States was becoming richer and was richer than they had ever been in American history, which means that the middle class under Donald Trump were more wealthy than any civilization and under any government for all time. All of recorded human history. Never had any country in the world ever seen such bounty for not the rich and not just the poor, although the poor did get better too, but the median household income, highest level ever recorded, the strongest economy the world had ever seen. And for those who want to see some of the worst off amongst us do better, African American unemployment at an all-time low. Another libertarian goal of Donald Trump, which I think is to be applauded, a record number of regulations eliminated that hurt small businesses. The Donald Trump administration has actually presided over an administration that cut, for every one regulation that has been added, 2 other regulations have been cut. And they've been following this, and I've been following that very closely because it's one of the most important promises that the president made that he has kept to, which I think has been important. And I think this one I actually struggled on whether or not I would put it in foreign policy or not, because it's an economic question, but I'll use this to segue to foreign policy. But the United States is a net natural gas exporter for the first time since 1957. Russia and China hate this. The Saudis hate this. The Middle Eastern dictators absolutely hate the fact that the United States is now a net natural gas exporter. We are a creator of a cleaner, better energy source than a lot of countries could provide to us from their own reserves because of how we have managed our resources. And one of those, of course, started before Donald Trump, fracking. But let's move on to foreign policy. Under Donald Trump's leadership in 2018, the United States surpassed Russia and Saudi Arabia to become the world's largest producer of crude oil. This is an energy independence question. I think it leads to one that's a foreign policy question. If you've ever thought to yourself that perhaps the United States is getting into these no-win wars, perhaps for oil, maybe Michael Moore is really right, maybe the United States really is resource rich, or the United States really is hungry to invade the Middle East for oil. Well, if so, the United States becoming the world's largest producer of crude oil is a national security win, because if you don't want to be overseas in the Middle East, if you don't want to be over there protecting the Strait of Hormuz and constantly saber rattling against the dictatorship of Iran, for example, for harassing our shipping lanes, perhaps, then you should applaud this. It's not just an economic victory here. This is a foreign policy victory for the United States. And hopefully we continue to see more and more politicians pushing for the Trumpist / libertarian rhetoric on this one, which is that we need to protect America first. Now, under President Trump's leadership, ISIS has lost most of their territory and been largely dismantled. Now, we may disagree or agree to disagree perhaps on how ISIS is being dismantled. We may wish that the President of the United States, if engaging in any military act overseas, is getting proper constitutional authorization for that. Some people might say, well, the authorizations for the use of military force, the AUMFs, are proper congressional legislation, but it's not constitutional legislation. It just is legal. What the president may be doing overseas is legal, but unconstitutional. And therein sometimes I think is where the libertarians have a little bit of a challenge, because we will sometimes confuse morality, legality, and constitutionality. Typically, when we libertarians hear something is constitutional, you might think, oh, well, that's a good idea. But consider this. The income tax is constitutional. So does that make it moral? No, that's an example of something that is legal, immoral, and unfortunately I have to say constitutional, because it was passed properly with a constitutional amendment, the 17th Amendment. Another example, legal, immoral, in my mind, my opinion, and constitutional because it was passed through the proper constitutional process. So these are three separate concepts that I think you should keep distinct in your head when judging, when making an analysis about a behavior that the president engages in, or Congress engages in, or the courts. Is it legal? Is it moral? Is it constitutional? Is it legal for the president of the United States to diminish ISIS militarily? Yes. Is it moral? Yes. Is it constitutional? I would say no, but therein lies the rub, and that's where we can have the debate. Now, President Trump actually won over some neocon converts, but wait, don't let that trigger you, because I know it will. The first of its kind, President Trump negotiated a historic peace deal between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, August 13th, 2020. So a fairly recent win, a peace deal between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Jeb Bush even praised it. And Jeb Bush hates Donald Trump so much. And yet he could even acknowledge that this was a good thing for peace in the Middle East. Now, foreign policy, we could go on. We've seen some debates between characters like Justin Amash and Senator Rand Paul, who are arguing over varying degrees of whether Donald Trump is anti-war or not. Has he brought troops home from here or there? Some people say that he has shuffled them around. Others say he's brought them home. For example, like Syria, the troops were removed from Syria. However, they were placed in other areas, right? What is the libertarian ideal here? And what is an improvement of foreign policy? That's debatable and something that we couldn't cover in a 6-hour speech. So if you have a question about that one after for the Q&A, hold on to that one, and we can discuss that one a little bit. Let's move on to another libertarian priority and see what Trump's report card is. Civil rights and liberties, specifically gay rights. Now, some of you may or may not be familiar with an incident which didn't involve Donald Trump directly, but it involved one of his representatives for Turning Point USA. And it was at an event with Charlie Kirk, and I'm forgetting the name of the gentleman he's a gay black man who is a representative for Turning Point USA. And at this event, this gay black man got up and discussed his conservative principles to an audience of largely Donald Trump supporters. Now, if you don't remember this incident, you can still look it up online, but it turned into, I believe Dan Crenshaw was there as well, but it turned into, well, I can't say bad words, but a poop show, we shall say, because Donald Trump supporters, sometimes they call themselves groypers, America First, paleo conservatives, nationalist types, hardcore nationalist types who are supporters of Donald Trump, were attacking Charlie Kirk for allowing openly gay black people to say that they were conservatives, because many people criticize them for that. And I thought that was fascinating to me, because Charlie Kirk, whether you love him or hate him, love the memes with his small face, what have you, it doesn't matter, because Charlie Kirk stood up bravely and defended the conservative principles of a gay man. Because conservatism is, to me, a set of principles for good governance. For some people, it means also how to behave in public. You know, don't go dancing naked on stage. Don't give heroin to 5-year-olds. Okay, perhaps, you know, abortion, perhaps, you know, maybe I, you know, could technically be considered a conservative on abortion if I'm not really conservative on anything else, because I'm pro-life. And we can debate that later if you have a question about it as well. But Charlie Kirk stood up to the president's own supporters who did not agree with allowing a gay black man to be a representative for the MAGA movement. As a matter of fact, there was also, I believe, a trans character by the name of Lady MAGA, who the Groypers were trying to read out of the Trump movement. You're not a real libertarian. Oh, I mean, I'm sorry. You're not real MAGA. You're not a real conservative. You're not one of us. Doesn't that sound familiar? And I have to say that Charlie Kirk and his representatives really won my respect for that. It's not easy to tell your friends the things that they don't want to hear. This speech, for example, what I've been saying on Twitter in the last few days, for example, not popular with my base, not popular. What's popular is for me to just give you the platitudes, tell you what you want to hear, say the libertarian movement is pretty, you're beautiful, let me put a little diaper on your butt and you're going to be great and you're going to get your 0% and you're going to go and everybody's going to laugh at you and everything's going to be okay. But if I truly cared, I would tell you that something's wrong with your strategy. It's time to change the strategy. And when I see someone doing what Charlie Kirk does and saying, I'm going to stand up for this person for their conservative principles, even if it's not popular with the president's people, I find that compelling. As a matter of fact, when Donald Trump Jr., I think only 2 days ago, posted an Instagram post saying gay married couples should defend their marijuana plants with guns, I cheered out loud. I was so excited. Here is a quote meme, a libertarian quote meme of mine that I had shared, that I had come up with like years and years and years before that had finally made the rounds enough to where the president's son, who by the way is considered to be a leading presidential candidate for the next cycle, I kid you not, and we could laugh and you could smile and kind of roll your eyes, but his dad is the president, and a lot of people did the same thing then. So I'm not going to roll my eyes about anything anymore. I think I'm just going to say, you never, stranger things. But I'll say that the response by the members of the Libertarian Party when that happened showed to me that the Trump derangement syndrome had infected the liberty movement so as to make them not support libertarian principles even when Donald Trump or his people had supported it. And to me, the idea is we want our ideas to go mainstream. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with Murray Rothbard, when he was asked about this similar point, he said that the idea, any libertarian should be delighted to see their ideas being taken up by any of the two major parties. That's a win. That's a victory for us. If the Republican Party and the Democratic Party took platform planks from my campaigns 2016, 2018, and brushed them off and said, okay, this is what we support now, that is an objective good. And I think we have to see that for what it is. Donald Trump appointed 5 openly gay ambassadors. Do you know how many openly gay ambassadors Barack Obama appointed? 0. Trump ordered his openly gay ambassador to Germany, Rick Grinnell, to lead a global initiative to decriminalize homosexuality across the globe. And it really irked me because my libertarian friends decided to poke me on this one and just say, oh, well, he only did this so he could put pressure on the government of Iran. He only did it so that he could put pressure on these Middle Eastern countries where they're, throwing gays off of buildings and things. Okay. And okay, we're not talking about using hard power here. We're not talking about ordering drone strikes. We're talking about leading a global initiative to say, hey, you all need to liberalize more. This is what Donald Trump has advocated for. Could you ever see something like that? You think that Ronald Reagan would have done something like that with Jerry Falwell behind him in the moral majority of the 1980s? Let me tell you something, kids. I grew up during the 1980s, and there was no way that Ronald Reagan or Jerry Falwell would ever been caught dead advocating for an openly gay ambassador to go around the world to decriminalize homosexuality. Wouldn't have happened, kids. So think about that. And then in February of 2020, this year, Rick Grinnell promoted to Director of National Intelligence, making him the first ever gay cabinet member for president. President Trump has ordered a halt to all U.S. taxpayer money going to international organizations that fund or perform abortions. No matter where you stand on the life issue, nobody should be forced to pay for someone else's abortion. Now, what about the war on drugs? Donald Trump, he doesn't like drugs. He said a lot of nasty things about doing drugs and people who do drugs. He's never done drugs. And drugs are really important to libertarians. And I get it. I'm for the legalization of all drugs for consenting adults, not for kids. And I'll fight you on that one. In 2018, on December 20th, Trump signed a bill making CBD and hemp legal. And my libertarian friends will chime in and say, okay, but that was mostly Mitch McConnell doing that. Okay, let's give Mitch McConnell credit then. But then conversely, when we attack Donald Trump for spending so much money, does he get credit for the fact that he's not in charge of the spending, that the Congress has the power of the purse? So he gets blamed for that and no credit for signing legislation. It just seems like there's a little Trump derangement syndrome in there. But Trump did sign the bill for CBD and making hemp legal. And my libertarian friends are like, still not happy. You're still not happy? You're just, okay, well, then I'm not done. Just wait. There's more. Billy Williams here. Just wait. There's more. He signed a bill this year, Donald Trump did, allowing some drug imports from Canada so that prescription prices would go down. Boom, there it is. Lock it up. That was in my 2018 Republican senatorial campaign platform. Allow us to purchase some drugs from Canada. For the love of God, let us have prescription drug prices go down. Now, I know a lot of you are in college, but I'm 39 years old, and I can remember 20 years ago being in college and not thinking about prescription drug prices. But now that I'm 39, I have to think about the fact that an inhaler costs $300 a month, okay, for one inhaler. And that inhaler goes down now to $280 a month or $250 a month. These are huge, huge costs imposed on the American people that Donald Trump has, to a degree, not entirely. We can't go across the border to Canada and buy all the good stuff that we want just yet, but to a degree, lessened the burden on the American people. So if you are sick or if you have a pre-existing condition right now, then you can thank President Trump for helping us to be able to buy drugs, some prescription drugs from Canada, not all. And what about the Grand Fromage, the big cheese? The one thing that libertarians have been, for decades, we have fought for against the FDA. We have fought for so hard for the right to try. And then poof, overnight, it's done and it happens. And we're still not happy. We're still not happy. Even though on May 30th of 2018, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, signed the Right to Try bill that allows terminally ill patients to try experimental treatments that were not approved by the FDA. And then, of course, the FDA proved how irrelevant they are in larger process. Just with the pandemic this year, they stood in the way of testing for COVID-19 being distributed amongst the many states. And I think that this pandemic has really shown just how massively horrible many of these bureaucracies are. And without going too much in a tangent, I will say that the President of the United States just last week signed an executive order that is his prerogative. Now, we libertarians, we complain about executive orders, rightfully so, many times when they are used improperly. But every president of the United States since George Washington has signed executive orders. And the purpose of the executive order is what? The purpose of an executive order is so that the President of the United States can direct the agencies which are under his administration on how to enforce the law. That is the power of the executive order. The executive order was not meant to write law. The executive order was to tell the agencies which operate in the executive branch how to enforce the law, to direct them how to enforce the law. President Trump, in signing an executive order last week, has changed the way that you can hire or fire specifically federal bureaucratic employees who set policy. Unelected bureaucrats at the FDA, the USDA, the Department of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, all of these gigantic bureaucracies which operate underneath the purview of the President of the United States, unelected bureaucrats who set policy, nobody voted for these people, can now be fired. Because these are people who are the ones who are passing overnight COVID regulations, many of them. So the CDC, right, can overnight set a rule or a regulation that that agencies have to obey, and they can set that policy overnight without any law or legislation passed by Congress. The president, in signing that executive order last week, has probably done one of the most sweeping libertarian acts of his presidency, and that executive order has terrified the leftists. If you haven't read the NPR article about them screaming about what the president has done to endanger these federal employees, you must read it. If you're running low on liberal tears, don't worry, you're going to get stocked up tomorrow night when he wins again. But you should go and check that article from NPR. Now, okay, what about criminal justice reform? When I said earlier that Donald Trump was better than Joe Biden on criminal justice reform, were you aware of Joe Biden's 1994 crime bill? Did you see my tweet when I said, rather tongue-in-cheek, but also with a hint of irony, perhaps, that a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Derek Chauvin? Derek Chauvin was the police officer who had his knee on the neck of George Floyd for 7.5 minutes, choking him out and killing him. Because Joe Biden was the author of the crime bill, the one that punished these minorities. And Donald Trump is the person who signed the First Step Act. The First Step Act. First Step Act's reforms addressed inequalities in sentencing laws that disproportionately harmed Black Americans and reformed mandatory minimums that created unfair outcomes. A groundbreaking criminal justice reform bill helping former inmates successfully return to society. This alone, not just Neil Gorsuch, not just the other executive order to fire federal employees, not just the energy independence, not just the strength of the economy, but this alone should be enough for you, if you're voting tomorrow, to cast a vote for Donald Trump and to sleep well in your libertarian beds, while my former Libertarian Party friends are throwing poo at me and fighting me, and I'll stand in between you guys, and you should feel fine. You'll sleep well at night. Over 90% of the people who benefit from the First Step Act sentencing reductions, retroactive sentencing reductions, the 90% of the people who will be benefiting from that are Black Americans. And they know it too, because this year, the trends, if you're to believe the poll, the trends have shown that Black Americans and Hispanic Americans are supporting Donald Trump at higher numbers than they did in 2016. And it was pretty high for a white Republican guy, pretty high. Of course, he wasn't running against a Black Democrat, so that might have helped. But that doesn't explain why he's getting more of their support this time. Maybe it's pictures with Lil Wayne. Maybe it's Kim Kardashian showing up. Maybe it's Kanye West coming in. Maybe. I know a lot of people want to attribute to that. But maybe Black Americans really do see what's happening in their communities. Maybe they do like the lower unemployment. Maybe they do like, seeing their mothers and grandmothers being released from prison because they sold weed 30 years ago. Maybe they really do know what's in their best interest. And maybe we need to stop patting them on the head as libertarians and liberals, telling them what's good for them. And we know what's good for them. You need to vote for the libertarians. We know what's good for you African Americans. Oh, by the way, we Libertarian Party, we are a 90% majority white people party, but we know what's best for you. We know the Republican Party is more diverse than the Libertarian Party in terms of minorities than the Libertarian Party. But the Libertarian parties, we know more about criminal justice reform than we do, because we're the nerds, you see, we are the book nerds. We're the white kids who read the books, and we're going to tell you how it is. You listen to us, minority. We libertarians will tell you. So just if anybody tries to clip that, because many people have been clipping my quotes out of context, that was sarcasm. For those who are unaware, who don't understand how our sarcasm works. Okay. First Step Act. Man, I could go on and on forever for that one, but I know we got to get to questions. Government accountability. I hit that one. Education. Good God. Education. I could go on for hours. I spoke to Corey DeAngelis this morning on my radio show about the stark difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And it's not a lesser of two evils. No, it's not a lesser of two evils. When it comes to education, between Donald Trump and Joe Biden is looking to appoint one of the heads of the major teacher unions to the Secretary of the Department of Education role. Who sits as the Department of Education Secretary under Donald Trump? Betsy DeVos. Do you know who Betsy DeVos is? If you don't, then you should. If you haven't heard of Hillsdale College, I know that y'all are from Dartmouth, but I highly recommend that you take a look at Hillsdale College's classes on Austrian economics. As a matter of fact, I believe, other than the Foundation for Economic Education in the United States, as well as, I believe, the Mises Institute and the Cato Institute. The Hillsdale College Library is the only other Austrian economics library. And guess who paid for that Austrian economics library with the bust of Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek and others in there? Guess who paid for that? Out of their own pockets, Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, who is one of the greatest advocates for school choice that the United States has ever had, who said last week that the Department of Education has done more harm than good for students here in the United States. Are you nodding your head? Is this what you want to hear? That's what you'll hear with 4 more years of President Trump. You'll have more Betsy DeVos, or you'll have more teachers unions under Joe Biden. And if you want to just vote for a third party just because you don't like either one of them, fine. Just, Joe Biden and Donald Trump are not the same. And to me, that has really been the thing that has infuriated me the most, is that the talking points from previous elections are trying to be carried over today. And I think it strikes me as fundamentally dishonest, because I do not believe that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are the same. Whether it's education, government accountability, criminal justice reform for minorities, civil rights and liberties for gays, foreign policy to reduce number of U.S. deaths, troops abroad, or the American economy, there is a stark difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the people they appoint, the party, and what they believe. So tomorrow's election, when you cast your vote, if tomorrow is the day that you're going to vote, if you had worried that Donald Trump might not be libertarian enough for you, take this speech, clip it, share it with your friends and family and your neighbors, and say, I proudly voted for Donald Trump as a libertarian, small L libertarian, for this reason, this half-hour speech by Austin Peterson that he gave at Dartmouth College to a grand applause at the very finale. And of course, since there's no one here to applaud, thank you very much, and I'll be glad to take your questions.